What's up, everybody? Big Herc 916, getting down fresh out. Make sure you guys hit that subscribe button. We got a very special interview for you guys today. I'm here with a man that, his history is part of American history. I'm here with Tony Bonanno, son of Bill Bonanno, grandson of Joseph Bonanno, and we're about to get a story today, you guys. Tori, man, I'm glad you were able to do the interview. I appreciate your time. Tell the people a little bit about how you grew up, man. What was it like? I mean, was it any different than their average childhood kid, or what was it like growing up, man?
Well, when you're a kid, you don't know it's any different, right? It's your reality. There was extraordinary things happening around us, but they were your life, right? I have memories when we lived in Long Island, New York in the '60s, and they had a basement, and that basement there was weapons, there was food. I mean, it was a shelter, it was a barracks, because they had a war going on, but at the time, there was just they were all our uncles, Uncle Carl, Uncle Frank, and they were around, and they roughhoused with me, and I was 2 or 3 years old, and I loved it, right? So to me, it seemed perfectly normal to have 4 uncles living in the basement. It wasn't until later in life, you realize what was going on at the time, that it was something different. In fact, one story that always sticks in my mind is one day on the back then everybody got the newspaper, right? Mm-hmm. And the newspaper was sitting out on the table, and it was a picture of who we called Uncle Frank, and he had he was bleeding, laying on the the curb in the sidewalk, and my dad said, "Oh yeah, it was a big story. He tripped and fell and hit his head, and unfortunately he passed away." And okay, and I went about my business, my life, and it wasn't until 15, 20 years later I realized that was a hit, and that he got taken out. It was during the Bonanno Wars, Bonanno Wars, they called them. At the time, no, it was completely normal childhood. It wasn't until later in life, really when I got to high school, when people started to say how extraordinary things were, and then you started hanging out with different people and seeing their lives, and you realize, oh, okay, this maybe it was a little different, the way I grew up. But at the time, no, you don't know it.
So when people actually recognize your last name, they're like, "Dude, is your grandfather Joseph Bonanno?"
Right. And back then it was a big thing because the San Jose Mercury News, where we grew up in San Jose, was a big thing, and they were on the cover of the paper all the time, so everybody knew it. But over the years, it was anybody under who lived that time remembers, because it was it was part of the the media. But as I got older, that whole generation, it kind of passed, and now it's anybody under 50, if they recognize the name, I'm kind of surprised. People over 50, oh, are you relation? They remember the stories. My grandfather and my dad in New York and all that. So they always it's kind of a celebrity type thing with them. But it's few and far between these days. It's so their heydays was my grandfather was the 30s to the 50s, my dad the 50s and 60s, and then all the narcotics and money and all these movies, casino, all that's from the 80s and 90s, and that's kind of just a little past when they were in their heyday. Let's just for lack of a better term.
So when you see movies and stuff, and you see the references, like say for instance like Goodfellas, does any of those characters in there reminiscent of anybody you met in your childhood? Or
oh, absolutely. I mean, the characters, they were, my dad had a good friend named Nick. He was his consigliere. He was he was around, and he was a character, and they designed all those characters in the movies after Nick and Gary and those guys. They were they were true wise guys. That they like to be called. And I could see all those guys. And for me, the stuff like Casino and those movies, I was a young kid. I wasn't really involved in out at the nightclubs and doing this and that. But what really hit home for me was the Sopranos, when they showed his family life and showed his son and things like that. It was like a lot of that it was dead on. And I know my dad consulted with them on some of those episodes to make it authentic. Specifically the episode, I don't know if you saw The Sopranos, but there's one where a guy's wearing a baseball hat in a restaurant, and you just didn't do that. And he called them out. They would get up and walk over to the other table and call, make them take their hat off.
Oh, wow.
That happened more than once in my life. And that was, you didn't, wear a hat.
In a restaurant, took your
hat
off.
In a restaurant, you took, and then, like somebody trying to grab it, the tab from my dad when he was at the head of the table. There's an episode of Sopranos that were like that. I think the daughter, I forget her name, her boyfriend wanted to, impress him and pick up the tab. And that was a huge insult. And, my dad never let anybody pick up a tab at a table.
Wow.
Beside, he always picked up the tab. And that was a point of pride for him.
Wow.
And that was just, those are the kind of things that, I just thought it was normal. That, any man of the family, you're the dad. When I'm with my kids and stuff, of course I pick up the tab. And still now, I've got my, son in 30s and he picks up tabs. It still bothers me a little bit. I don't say anything because I know it's a different time and he means well by it. But it is a little bit, you feel, man, it's not, not what I'm supposed to, I wasn't raised this way. I'm supposed to be picking up this tab. But, I was surprised to see that in the Sopranos episode when I saw that. I was like, that is so right on.
Now, did you ever, really notice how people treated like your grandfather or your dad? You're like, damn, these guys are really, they give them a certain level of respect. Like, did you catch on to that or not till really later? Because, a lot of people may not know, your grandfather and what he represented for the mob.
Oh, right. And that was, I noticed it because my grandfather, he commanded respect just when he walked into the room, and it didn't matter where you were. It seemed like, especially because when I was real young, we would come to Tucson in the 60s to visit. They would basically dump us off at Grandpa's house. And, there'd be all these people coming in and, they'd always bring, cognac and they'd, treat him with the utmost respect. And, you had in books, here your grandfather takes you fishing and stuff. I knew that wasn't my grandfather. But just the amount of people that came and the way everybody else treated him, you notice, you're like, something's different about this guy. Right. And he's special in, way he spoke, and he always was trying to, make a point, when he spoke to me anyway, or any of his grandchildren.
Kind of like a life lesson.
Right. He's always, he's always teaching, always trying to impart some sort of wisdom. And he was really frustrated with, he'd say, you stupid Americans, because, he knew philosophy, he knew astronomy, he knew, he could navigate by the stars. He was a captain, he graduated from college, he created this, this organization that, ran, very successfully for years. And, he couldn't believe that, we weren't studying Latin and we weren't doing, he was just like, and you only speak one language, he spoke like 7 languages.
Dang.
So
Wow.
he didn't have, he didn't tolerate, fools. Let's just
So see, that's
way.
a total misconception, because a lot of people didn't, they're not depicted in a lot of movies as having all this intelligence as far as like educated, even though, because I always looked up to mafia guys as far as in the movies. I'm like, man, the mafia, they're organized, their stuff is polished. But to know, dang, your grandfather's 7 languages, man, most people can't speak 2, let alone several.
Yeah, I'm one of those.
So,
I barely speak English.
I speak a little Spanish, but to learn several languages, man, that's a lot of discipline. And your grandfather came over here, in the 20s, 30s?
Yeah, in the early, he came with his family when he was a youngster, a couple years old. They moved into Brooklyn, and that was in the the late teens, early 20s. He lived here, and then they went back to Sicily, and then he came back later when basically Mussolini ran him out of Sicily. Mussolini, the school he went to, they all, Mussolini got to the point where they all had to wear these, black shirts, and it was a military academy, naval academy, and they all wore white. And he, organized a protest. They were not going to change their shirts.
Wow.
And then, when Mussolini got wind of it, he took off, and that's when he came to America. Well, came to Canada, down to Cuba, and then up through Florida.
So from your knowledge and what you've learned, when they came over and like he was there at practically, he was at the inception of when they kind of created this organization. What was the premise of that? Because how to see somebody in a group of men create something like that was that structured and ran with such just it was like a machine. How'd that come about, or do you know anything about how that?
Well, yeah, my grandfather's book, this book, he describes the commission, the creation of the commission, why they created it, how the structure and what its purpose was. Giuliani later used that to prosecute people with the RICO statutes. But Grandpa, he ran right from the 30s, 40s, and 50s. I mean, they were the shit, right?
Yeah, yeah.
They were the guys. They ran New York, and it was organized, and they treated it like a business, and they knew, and that's why he liked Lucky Luciano, because they saw the money, right? That if there's peace between the families and we all cooperate, and call that organized crime, I guess, but it was much more beneficial to everybody if we're all winning as opposed to killing each other and fighting,
right.
Having turf wars. And, he called it Pax Bonanno, and that was the golden era of the mafia because everybody was getting paid. Everybody knew the rules. And, my grandfather was a very, very traditional, and, he stuck to his guns when it came to, doing the right thing. And he ran his organization. Everybody knew their place in the organization. They knew, what to expect. They knew what the rules were, how you advanced. And it was the envy of the country, right? Because, they helped the army in World War II to, come through Sicily and then come up, the Italian peninsula and, up and to defeat the Germans. So everybody, always thought the mafia, especially back then, with Prohibition, I mean, they were running, they had it going on, and they were, corporations, now they drive around in, black cars, like, and they have these custom-made bulletproof cars. Well, they all got that from, the mafia, because, that was just the way they ran things. They were, they were very exact, and it was pretty amazing when you see what they had. Yet it all fell apart in the 60s. It did, some people say, it's lasted because here we are, in 2022, and we're still talking about it.
Yeah.
But it was, like you said, it's part of American history, and they were pretty successful at their, when they're at the top of the game.
So your grandfather, he dealt with like Myers Lansky, Al Capone, all those guys.
Oh, right. Yeah, he was interviewed in 60 Minutes, back in the 80s, and they asked him about Al Capone, and he liked him. He said he was a jovial fellow, right?
Yeah.
He was just, he was a good guy. He was a family guy, and he liked Al Capone. But they were all contemporaries. Luciano was an American. He called him an American because he was, he wasn't from Sicily, but he liked Luciano because he saw that there was potential in organizing and everybody making money.
Yeah.
But he didn't like him also because Luciano was all about money. He didn't care too much about the tradition the code that they lived by. It was like, that helps, but it's all about money, and that's where my grandfather and he kind of.
Do you think a lot of the family values actually helped as far as keeping guys in order? Because you look now and a lot of people have no family values. There's no the unit family structure is just so in disarray, and so when you try to instill certain values, people don't respect it. But back then there was a lot of family values, and you had like the Sunday dinners and the gatherings and stuff like that, and that kept everything tighter.
Oh, absolutely. And even like back then, even when I was a kid, if you mouthed off and some neighbor's mother heard you, or and they swatted you, that was fine. My parents would beat me because the other parent had to experience whatever I said or did, right? But nowadays, right, that would be a lawsuit. You can't touch my kid. Yeah. So everybody knew the structure. The neighborhoods, everybody knew, and then that was when I'm talking about the 70s. But if you go back to the when they were like my dad was growing up in Brooklyn in the 40s and 50s. The whole family structure, that was what made everything happen because everybody knew what the structure was. They knew, and especially the guys in the mafia, so to speak, they knew there's things that you could do, there's things that you can't do, and what the penalties were.
That's right.
If you did step out of line, and my grandfather would say, nobody who ever got whacked by the mafia didn't know it was coming. No surprise. They didn't do drive-bys. They didn't randomly take people out. It was when somebody violated the code. And they knew the price, and that's why my grandfather, if he asked if he ever killed anybody, he would never answer. Of course, never give you. Who's going to give an answer to that question, of course. Right? Well, Sammy the Bull did on a thing the other day, and it's like, wow, he's. But anyway, he felt they were, everything was justified. Everybody knew the rules, and if you didn't follow the rule, and it was very black and white to my grandfather and my father as well. they lived by that code. They called it, our thing, the La Cosa Nostra, right? So they, they were deeply entrenched in the code. And that's, I think, which gave structure to everything else. And, as far as the commission goes and the other families, I think they looked up to my grandfather and saw how he ran things and how successful he was. And they wanted to, emulate it.
Well, one of the things when I used to read a lot of the books, and like I said, it's always better to get something firsthand because, a book, we don't know what the relationship was to the person who's writing the story, but just how, how people carry themselves out in public, because when you went out, and if you were a part of a certain crew, you represented that family. So you had, carry yourself a certain way, and you did things a certain way. So you had a certain pride about yourself, and that's one of the things I noticed when you see, like you said, when you go to a restaurant and you see somebody, and in the movie you see that, you said like, this cocksucker, he's not gonna come over and say hi. He sees me sitting over here and he act like he don't see me. It was a respect thing. Right. So everybody had a certain level of respect. Like nobody would go into a room and your grandfather sit there and not acknowledge him knowing that he's in the room. So it was like, it was a certain level of respect where, now there's no respect. Nobody, you disrespect the old person. It's like, dude, nobody did that back then.
I remember one time when I went to school down in Tucson at the University of Arizona, and, my grandfather was in, he used to call it guest of the government at the time, but then he was home. And I had come back from, I was in the Bay Area and then had come back, and, I had an apartment there, and I went to my apartment and I did things. And then I, swung by my grandfather's house, and, I was, he was pissed at me. He was angry, and I had no idea, what I had done or didn't do. And then it turns out that, the code is, and I, deep down I knew, you're supposed to go in and say, hi to Grandpa first, check in with Grandpa, let him know, the travel, and then go about your business.
That's right.
Right, and I know, deep down I knew that, but I was a college kid and I was, was excited to get back to, my apartment and do stuff, and, but he reminded me, and, I never forgot that lesson. It's like, that was just the part, what you were supposed to do. And you're talking about restaurants. Yeah, if you ever walked into a restaurant and you're one of those guys and, you knew the code. You knew you had to go and, say hi and, acknowledge them. You couldn't do the, I didn't know you were there. That didn't fly.
And it's funny you say that, because even as a kid, and my family wasn't mafia, but when we went to visit my grandparents, first thing you did, you go in and say, your grandpa's back in the back room. Hey, Grandpa, how you doing? Oh, you guys came and decided here. Then I go see my grandma and everybody else. Right. But you make a segue and you let them know, hey, I'm in your house. Hey, thank you. How you doing? What's up? And you sit there for a little while. Then you can go play with your friends. But you never just arrived and took off on the streets.
Oh, absolutely. I wanted to go in and play with my cousins when I went over there. But I knew, if Grandma or Grandpa was back there, you always went, said hello to them. And I'm shocked now. I have a teenage, son, and he has friends. They come over, and some of them just walk into the house, and they'll walk back to his room, and they don't even say hi.
Wow.
And I, tell my son, no, get out here. Introduce your friend to your parents. You can't just, there's a way to do things. You can't just let them go back in your room. No. That's not going to fly. But those kids, it's not even part of their.
I remember my grandmother, man, and she's like, you don't see Miss So-and-so? Yeah. Hey, hi, Miss So-and-so, how you doing? Hi, Marcus, how you doing? Oh, now you can go. But you come in the room, you say hi to her first, and you respect it. So those are like little things that I was instilled in me, just Southern hospitality, as far as, growing up. Who is there anybody in particular that really stood out that you met that you said, man, this guy's a class act, man. This guy's like, he left an impression on you that you came in contact with, growing up?
Well, yeah, there was, several people, but, the first one that came to mind, as soon as you said it, was named, and he was my dad's, they grew up together. I don't know the exact, story, but I know what I believe is that his father was a soldier for my grandfather, and at one point, and died somewhere along the way, and my grandfather, basically took him in and raised him, because that was also part of the code, right? Okay. Soldier died, in the line of duty. They took care of his kids. And anyway, Gary was one of those guys that was, from back east. He was raised in the, in the tradition, and he was just always, impeccably dressed. Always had a cigar. I mean, he was going back to that's who they built the characters after. After Gary
Okay,
Kelly.
yeah.
He was a impressive character and a great guy, and was really I don't know. I felt like he understood me because when I got to be a teenager and stuff with my grandfather and my dad, I just these guys are they're full of shit, and he would set me straight, and back then it was not everybody could do that,
So was it like tradition to always be looking sharp? Because I always seen these guys, they always were sharp, man. The shoes, even when the guys were hanging out in front of the club, they always look impeccable. And I always look like, man, those guys are never, with no tennis shoes or tank. These guys always look like they were about business. Was that normal, like growing up, for seeing like everybody's kind of?
Well, my grandfather was very much that way.
Okay.
He didn't even come out of his room, without slippers and a robe on, and and a nice robe. He never, you never just saw him disheveled at all. And then when he went out in public, oh yeah, he was always dressed to the nines. He always, he knew how important it was, that perception people had of him, and it was very important. And my dad followed in his footsteps. They were always, really, you look at the way they were dressed, especially in the '80s when they had polyester and stuff. It kind of looks goofy now, but back then, that was the stuff. They always looked sharp. I don't think I ever saw any of those guys in shorts or even maybe on a boat somewhere. But even then, they had the white shoes on and the socks pulled up. Yeah, they was very important to them that how they looked.